For decades, Israel and Iran waged a secret war, spies, cyber attacks, and proxy battles in the shadows. This conflict was fought in the alleys of foreign capitals, in the digital ether, and through a web of proxies stretching from Lebanon to Syria and beyond. Each side tested the other's resolve, always careful to avoid a direct clash that could spiral out of control. The world knew of the tension, but most of the action remained hidden, a high-stakes chess game played in the dark. But in June 2025, everything changed. The fragile balance shattered overnight as the world awoke to a new reality. The headlines screamed of war, and the sense of foreboding was unmistakable. Israel launched a massive air assault on Iran, aiming to cripple its nuclear program. The operation was swift and overwhelming, targeting key facilities with precision-guided munitions. For the first time, Israel's military might was unleashed openly against Iran, sending shockwaves through the region. This was no covert operation, it was open war, broadcast to the world. News channels ran live footage of explosions lighting up the night sky, and reporters scrambled to make sense of the chaos unfolding in real time. Iran responded with hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones, targeting Israeli cities and strategic sites. The retaliation was fierce and immediate, as air raid sirens wailed and civilians rushed for cover. The scale of destruction was unlike anything seen in the region for years. The shadow war was over, a direct air war had begun. Military analysts described it as a turning point, with both nations now fully committed to open conflict. Dogfights erupted over the desert, and the world watched as the skies became a deadly arena. The old rules were gone. Both nations crossed a line, turning a regional rivalry into a state-on-state conflict. Politicians issued grave warnings, and the international community braced for the unknown. The skies became the main battlefield, fighter jets, missile defenses, and drones clashing above the region. Advanced technology met raw determination as both sides pushed their military capabilities to the limit. Daily life in both countries was upended by air raid sirens and constant fear. Families huddled in shelters, schools closed, and city streets emptied as the threat of attack loomed over every moment. The psychological toll was immense, with millions living in a state of anxiety. The world watched as the conflict threatened to ignite a wider regional war. The United Nations convened emergency sessions, and news anchors speculated about the possibility of escalation, drawing in other powers. Israeli warplanes struck deep into Iran, while Iranian missiles rained down on Israeli cities. Emergency services raced to respond, but the scale of the attacks overwhelmed even the most prepared. The international community scrambled, torn between calls for peace and the reality of a rapidly expanding war. Diplomats worked around the clock while protesters demanded action in capitals around the globe. What was once a contained rivalry now threatened global consequences. Stock markets tumbled, oil prices soared, and ordinary people everywhere felt the ripple effects of the conflict. The fighting was relentless, and the stakes had never been higher. Hospitals filled with the wounded and military convoys rolled through the night as both sides prepared for what could become a long and devastating war. The Middle East was on the brink of a new, dangerous era. Cities that once bustled with life now stood scarred and uncertain, their futures hanging in the balance. The world held its breath, uncertain of what would come next. Airports emptied as flights were canceled, and families waited anxiously for news of loved ones. The shadow war had burst into the open, and there was no turning back. The region and the world now faced a future shaped by the consequences of this unprecedented conflict. The road to open war was paved by years of escalating incidents, each one pushing the boundaries of what was once considered acceptable. Tensions simmered beneath the surface as both sides tested each other's resolve through shadowy operations and calculated provocations. Covert attacks, targeted assassinations, and relentless cyber warfare became the hallmarks of the Israel-Iran rivalry for decades. Intelligence agencies waged silent battles in the shadows, while hackers infiltrated critical infrastructure, leaving entire cities vulnerable to sudden blackouts and chaos. By the early 2020s, these clandestine actions grew bolder and more destructive. Cyber attacks crippled Iranian infrastructure, plunging neighborhoods into darkness, while Iran's proxies in Lebanon and Syria tightened their grip around Israel, threatening its borders with increasing frequency. The buffer of plausible deniability eroded as both sides began to engage in direct, though still limited, military exchanges. Missile launches and airstrikes became more common, signaling a dangerous shift from covert operations to open confrontation. The risk of miscalculation soared, with military leaders and politicians on both sides aware that a single mistake could ignite a regional war. The world watched anxiously as headlines warned of a looming crisis. In June 2025, Israeli intelligence issued a stark warning. Iran was on the verge of a nuclear breakout. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had all but disappeared. Faced with what it saw as an existential threat, Israel launched a preemptive air campaign, targeting nuclear facilities and military infrastructure deep inside Iran. The shadow war ended in a flash of explosions and sirens. Open war had begun, and civilians across the region scrambled for safety as the conflict erupted into the public eye. The region was thrust into crisis, with millions displaced, and the world's attention riveted on the unfolding catastrophe. International leaders scrambled to respond, but the old order had already been shattered. Years of covert escalation, sabotage, and secret missions had finally exploded into the open, changing the course of history in a matter of days. The Middle East would never be the same. The world now faced a new and uncertain reality, shaped by the consequences of actions once hidden in the shadows. The Israel-Iran air war is a dramatic showcase of modern military technology, where the latest advancements in aviation and defense are put to the ultimate test. In this conflict, every second counts, and every decision can mean the difference between survival and destruction. Israel's F-35S and F-15S, designed for stealth, speed, and precision, launched daring raids deep into Iranian territory. In just a few hours, these advanced jets managed to destroy nearly a third of Iran's air defense network, crippling its ability to respond effectively. The missions were meticulously planned, relying on real-time intelligence, electronic warfare, and seamless coordination between pilots and ground control. Israel's multi-layered missile shield, Arrow, Iron Dome, and U.S. support intercepted most incoming threats, but at a staggering cost. Each interception required expensive high-tech missiles, and the relentless barrages tested the limits of even the most advanced systems. The cooperation between Israeli and American forces was crucial, with joint command centers working around the clock to track and neutralize threats. Iran, lacking a modern air force, turned to overwhelming barrages of ballistic missiles and swarms of drones. Their strategy was to saturate Israeli defenses, hoping that sheer numbers would allow some weapons to slip through. The skies were filled with the roar of engines and the trails of missiles, as Iran unleashed its arsenal in waves. Hundreds of missiles targeted Israeli cities and military sites, saturating the country's defenses. Despite the best efforts of the missile shield, about 10% of the projectiles broke through, causing significant damage to infrastructure and endangering civilians. Air raid sirens became a constant presence, forcing families to seek shelter at a moment's notice. As the conflict escalated, Iran resorted to using cluster munitions, weapons notorious for their indiscriminate impact and long-term danger to civilians. This move drew swift international condemnation, as images of unexploded bomblets and injured non-combatants spread across global media. The air war is not just a contest of machines and tactics, it's a brutal struggle with devastating consequences for ordinary people. Homes are destroyed, families are displaced, and the humanitarian crisis deepens with every passing day. Every new weapon introduced on the battlefield pushes the boundaries of modern warfare, raising the stakes and changing the rules of engagement. The rapid pace of innovation means that each side is constantly adapting, seeking any advantage in this high-tech arms race. The skies over the Middle East have become a deadly arena, where advanced aircraft, missiles, and drones clash in a relentless contest for dominance. The outcome of each engagement shapes the course of the conflict and the future of air combat itself. Yet for all the technology and firepower, there is no guarantee of safety. Even the most sophisticated defenses cannot protect everyone, and the psychological toll on both soldiers and civilians is immense. The cost in lives and resources is mounting by the day. As the conflict drags on, the true price of modern air combat becomes painfully clear, not just in destroyed equipment, but in shattered communities and lost futures. Beneath the headlines, civilians bear the brunt of this conflict. In Israel, air raid sirens and missile strikes have killed dozens and wounded hundreds, even hitting hospitals. In Iran, Israeli airstrikes have killed hundreds, with numbers disputed but the suffering undeniable. Both sides target military sites, But civilians are caught in the crossfire, homes destroyed, families displaced. Southern Lebanon and northern Israel see mass evacuations as fighting spreads. Airports close, embassies evacuate, and daily life grinds to a halt. Children can't go to school, businesses shutter. The psychological toll is immense. Fear, trauma, and uncertainty dominate. The war's true cost is measured in shattered lives and lost futures. For millions, normal life has vanished overnight. The Israel-Iran war has ignited the region. Hezbollah opens a second front from Lebanon, launching rockets and drones into Israel. Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq attack Israeli and U.S. targets, risking wider U.S. involvement. The conflict spreads to the seas. Tensions in the Strait of Hormuz threaten global oil supplies. Maritime attacks and GPS jamming disrupt shipping, raising fears of economic crisis. Each new front adds chaos, making diplomacy harder and escalation more likely. The war is no longer bilateral, it's a regional wildfire. One spark could engulf the entire Middle East. The world scrambles to respond as war rages. The US supports Israel militarily but hesitates to escalate, hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough. Europe pushes for urgent talks, convening meetings with Iran to avert disaster. Russia and China back Iran, condemning Israeli strikes and warning against regime change. The UN is paralyzed by division, no unified action emerges. Global powers are split, emboldening both sides to keep fighting. Diplomacy is urgent but fragile, with little progress so far. The lack of unity reduces pressure for peace. The world watches, divided and anxious. The cycle of violence continues, unchecked by global consensus. At the heart of the conflict is Iran's nuclear program. Israel sees a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat, driving its air campaign. Israeli intelligence claims Iran is weeks from a bomb. Iran insists its program is peaceful. Iran's uranium stockpile is close to weapons grade, alarming the world. Israel targets nuclear sites, but Iran's most critical facilities are deeply buried and hard to destroy. Only the US has the bunker busters needed for such targets, highlighting Israel's limits. The standoff is dangerously unstable. Each side's actions risk accelerating the nuclear race. The conflict is a high-stakes race against time and proliferation. Until the nuclear issue is resolved, peace remains out of reach. The nuclear question fuels the fire, keeping the region on edge. The war's shockwaves are global. Oil prices surge as the Middle East's energy arteries are threatened. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a conflict zone, disrupting shipping and raising fears of a global economic crisis. Supply chains falter, costs rise, and investment stalls. Multinational companies face chaos and risk. The war threatens the rules-based global order, risking wider power confrontation. Every nation feels the impact, making peace an urgent global priority. The world's economic stability hangs in the balance. As the conflict enters its second week, the future is perilous. Escalation could trigger a full-scale regional war, drawing in global powers and causing catastrophic casualties. A long war of attrition would mean endless violence and hardship for millions. The slim hope is a diplomatic breakthrough requiring immense international pressure and compromise, but deep animosity and bloodshed make peace elusive. The risk of miscalculation is high. One mistake could spark a wider war. The shadow war is over. Open conflict now shapes the region's destiny. The world waits, caught between hope and fear. The stakes could not be higher. The path ahead is uncertain, and the consequences will echo for years to come.